If we can imagine a situation that just-in-time working practice that Toyota developed to suit its car manufacturing plant, and it's done nothing else but to work on this for 75 years. So some bright spark thought, this is a good idea. We plonk it into retailing industry, where Toyota were responding to actual demand signal. We don't tend to work in that way in retail. We tend to do demand forecasts, which don't lend themselves very easily to just in time. It's not an actual demand, it's a kind of full demand. And we know that forecasts can be wrong most of the time, if not all the time. But I'd like to think of this, if we can imagine that we're working with a supplier in the Far East, and we've given them a big order for 10,000 widgets, and they can produce it and fill a container with 100 widgets, and they can send it every time they produce a container, they put it on a boat and off it comes to us. So we've got all these little pieces of things coming to us, and imagine our demand changes like it has done. Consumers may switch their channel, they switch their categories, they switch their volume, and this thing that we set in motion maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago, we're committed to this coming at us. And there's no easy way, especially now. We can't go, I'll tell you what, replace another order and get it flown over to us. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm a senior executive on call, helping businesses in the make, move, sale flow of consumer goods and services. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available through my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check it out. As the business world faces much volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity, organizations need to be tapping into resources with an inside edge on transitioning their teams to be agile, innovative and digital, with thought leaders, experts and senior executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations to help reorientate their enterprises. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started.
Hello, Diane. Welcome.
How are you, Michael?
Good. Nice to see you. Nice to
see you too. Store
is done. You know, that's a big day, week, period in the history of Retail Council of Canada. That's always this big thing, right? It's a big thing to put on. It's in the rearview mirror. It looked great from participating in a bit and from watching it. Congratulations to you and the team.
Congratulations to the team. I had very little to do with it, but they did an amazing job. And thank you, Michael, because I know you were also on the team that looked at what the theme should be and the speakers. So you were just, not only were you moderating, hosting, and everything else, but you were great. So thank you. Hi, Carl. So Carl, we're going to start with Gary and Audrey for the first 15 minutes or so. So thank you to our members who join us religiously once a week for these calls and these roundups. As we've said in the past, your feedback, your comments, your questions are extremely helpful. And so we really thank you for taking the time. We know that everyone is very busy juggling video conference calls and meetings. So thank you all. We thought we would start the first 15 minutes of this call with an overview of the retail supply chain, because as all of you know, there have been lots of challenges. There continues to be challenges, but there are things that you may want to think about. And we had Gary Newbury and Audrey Ross as speakers at STORE, and it was so well received that we asked Gary and Audrey. Gary is the senior executive on call retail supply chains and last mile at RetailAID.ca, and Audrey Ross is logistics and custom specialist at Orchard Custom Beauty. So we've asked them to join us for the first 10 to 15 minutes. So we certainly encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A box or the chat box, but Q&A just makes it a bit easier for us to manage. And so I'm delighted, and RCC is delighted to have both Gary and Audrey with us. So why don't we welcome them, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions, and then we'll move on to government relations. So Gary, Audrey, thank you both for being with us. So why don't we jump right in?
Thank you very much, and delighted with the feedback from our session at RCC. During that session, we looked at things like agility, sustainability, resilience, and tried to unpick those general concepts, and just talked generally about retail supply chains and at quite a high level some of the blockages that were occurring and some glimpses into the future. But for this session, I was talking to Audrey yesterday, we thought what we would try to address, a short summary of that plus our own views, is to think about where we have been pre-pandemic and what's happened during the pandemic and what we may be needing to think of at this point if a pandemic or the impacts of a pandemic and the disruption on the supply chain continues for some time into the future. So I'm going to just quickly kick off with where we were pre the pandemic, if that's all right, Audrey. So we had a long period of time where the supply chain was a backroom function. It really, if we had a twist or turn or wobble in it, somebody got a pointy finger, somebody got shouted at, and it all went away. The problem went away. And it was never seen as a vehicle for how we deliver value to consumers. The supply chain was just in the background doing its thing. And alongside that, we had very stable growth over a long period of time, only disrupted by like the Great Recession. That caused some disruption, but not at anywhere near the scale that we had now. We had companies going bust and a normal thing that happens, but was accelerated into a short period of time. But coming out of that recession, it was pretty stable, 2 to 3% economic growth. Some retailers falling by wayside, some new ones popping up. We knew where the peak was. It was pretty much the same every year in the same duration, whether it was spring, summer, Christmas, whatever it might have been. It was fairly predictable. We used to build a stock up. We always had, you know, the Far East, typically that's where we ended up sourcing from majority of stuff. It was a pretty reliable, consistent source of supply, but it did attach to it a very long time delay between our order and when we actually had the stock secured into our stores. So nothing to see here. So we entered the pandemic, and for the first period of lockdown, I think we were still bringing stuff over. It was going through the ports, getting onto trucks, getting onto railheads, getting into our DCs. So the first lockdown was difficult for sure, but it wasn't as disrupted as we're seeing now. Audrey, do you want to chip in with anything on the first stage of the pandemic?
Yeah, I echo your sentiments there, where we were all sort of having stability and consistency. And I think a supply chain manager or a company was looking for reliability and consistency in the supply chain. And it was pretty much available in the market at relatively low cost, especially on ocean shipping. When in your sort of stress mode, or if something sort of really went wrong, you know, we could rely on air service to compensate maybe if we had a big launch or specific promotion. So I think, you know, where we sort of settled into the pandemic was, you know, of course, there was a lot of uncertainty, but, you know, and there were some cancellations, you know, as people were just unsure of what was happening, or, you know, some of the stay-at-home orders caused people to miss some of those promotions or timings. But that was what it looked like in sort of the you know, and what the beginnings were. So, but we want to tell them, you know, about where we are now and where we're going as well.
Well, we opened up for the sort of the second half of last year, and things felt like they were kind of inching their way back to some normality. And then we started to see the thing start to jam up, with Wuhan sort of closing down and up and down, and ports closing up and down, ships, as you mentioned, initially what we call blank sailings in the first part of the thing. Things were being cancelled because there was just not enough traffic. And all of a sudden we had more than enough traffic, and we were having rollovers, so that if you thought you were going to go onto this boat coming out of China, but actually you had to slip a week or two because there was no capacity. And then it all started to really emerge that if you're coming across this side of the Pacific, that if you're coming into Los Angeles, you were going to, your cargo on that ship. It's going to sit in a holding pattern pending going into the harbour to be unloaded. And then there were issues with, there was some risk of union action, but more importantly, there was social distancing and outbreaks of COVID in and around that area, which really just slowed the whole thing up. And on top of that, if you were able to get it onto a truck, get onto a rail car, and they became a bit short in numbers, get it to Chicago to get it dispersed elsewhere. They closed down Chicago for a week or two just to clear the backlog. The whole supply chain, the whole physicality of moving stuff from manufacturing onto water, onto a dock, onto some form of transportation to get it to your DC or your warehouse, all became very fragmented and broken and congested and not working at all, frankly. And so we saw lead times go from 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks to 27 weeks. So the whole thing started to build up. Many retailers and many businesses in the wider sense just perhaps thought all we had to do is just work harder, use the same things that we would have done in 2019 and did during the first part of the pandemic, just do those harder, stronger, more. Now, if we believe that this could go on for a fair time more, unraveling this disruption, would it be now a good time to start thinking about what else could we do? Not what else could we do more than 2019, but how else could we think our way through this problem to try and solve this so we can get our supply chain shape, structure, organization into a better position to be more successful as we go into peak, and probably it's too late for that, but certainly for 2022.
Yeah, I think we were all very optimistic. I know I was, that this would be a temporary challenge, that we would see this as something like, of course, in Canada and in the US, we've had labor disruptions or we've had strikes or other sort of action that has delayed, some of the rail issues and backlogged, and then it clears up. And I think we're in a situation where things are backlogged or there's so much volume, there's no clearing. And there's absolutely, we can see no elasticity, no flexibility in the supply chain. So any issue anywhere in the world, a typhoon at Shanghai, the Suez Canal, anything is completely disrupting and causing just chaos. And so where we're at now is, do we think, if when Gary and I look into our crystal balls, we've been asked that question, what's in the crystal ball? Well, we would love to be optimistic and super positive, but the reality is that this is going to continue. So if your supply chain, as Gary said, was just let's just work harder, let's just do more, let's just spend more money, that's something that works sort of in the first year or two of this pandemic. But as we go forward into this kind of continuing supply chain crisis, what is next? So what are we going to think of to do business if business can't be done the same way? Having a consistent supply chain might be completely out the window for 2, 3, maybe 4 years. So how are we going to completely reorganize or shift what we're doing, our planning, our complete thought process around it? And how are we going to interact? Gary and I have this conversation. Instead of being in silos, supply chain is now every part of your supply chain. Manufacturing, how is merchandising going to be involved? How is sales going to be involved? To really have a comprehensive strategy. So that's, I think, where we're headed.
Yes. Thank you, Audrey. Is there any, I'm conscious that we're soon crashing up to the end of our 10 minutes. Is there any obvious question, any big questions that we...
Yeah. Well, Gary, I have one. We've talked for so many years about just-in-time inventory. So, when I'm listening to Audrey, and we're getting calls regularly from our retailers saying, this is a mess. And they've tried, and it's challenging trying to source differently, source locally, find a different manufacturer, but the entire retail world is trying to do that. In Canada, we dropped down the list of priorities. So thinking about the amount of investment that was made in just-in-time, what are your views around just-in-time inventory? And what do retailers on this call? Because some of them are owner-operators, some are in marketing, some are in merchandising. We have a mix of folks. And what are the things that they need to really do now, think about?
Yeah. So if we can imagine a situation that just-in-time was a working practice that Toyota developed to suit its car manufacturing plant, and it's done nothing else but to work on this for 75 years. So some bright spark thought, this is a good idea. We plonk it into retailing industry, where Toyota were responding to actual demand signal. A customer now wants a red Corolla with X, Y, and Z on it. We'll bring that together because we'll have our supplies fed against that demand pattern. We'll bring it in literally just in time to manufacture it and put it onto the sell on floor and sell it immediately. We don't tend to work in that way in retail. We tend to do demand forecasts, which don't lend themselves very easily to just in time. It's not an actual demand, it's a kind of full demand. And we know that forecasts can be wrong most of the time, if not all the time. But I'd like to think of this, if we can imagine that we're working with a supplier in the Far East and we've given them a big order for 10,000 widgets. And they can produce it and fill a container with 100 widgets. And they can send it, every time they produce a container, they put it on a boat and off it comes to us. So we've got all these little pieces of things coming to us. And imagine how demand changes like it has done. Consumers switch. They switch their channel, they switch their categories, they switch their volume. And this thing that we set in motion maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago, or even longer if we're in certain aspects of apparel, is now we're committed to this coming at us. And there's no easy way, especially now. We can't go, I'll tell you what, replace another order and get it flown over to us. It's not working. Having geographically extended supply chains worked when it was stable, or even if the demand went down a bit, we could just sort of store it at the warehouse. Now the demand has shifted, often by a magnitude. This system isn't working for us, and we know that, but we're not calling out often enough. We now need, as Audrey suggested, we need to really rethink this whole process. We need to do it really fast, but really diligently, because we can't just go, oh, we'll come off of that system and we'll go to another system. No, we've got to really rethink it hard. We've got to look at what are the opportunities we're faced with and how can we pick our way through that and get a supply chain design which is much more responsive to our customers' needs.
So let me ask you and Audrey questions. So, when you're talking about offshore and you're talking about all the challenges of getting the product to the distribution center, to the store, because of everything that's happened, and everyone in the organization having to rethink the whole issue of supply chain management. Get very quickly, because I know we have a limited amount of time. What are the challenges of nearshoring and creating a local supply chain? Because it's one thing to say, well, I'm going to have to find other vendors, but it's not that easy. So can you just highlight some of the things that folks need to keep an eye on as they're thinking of nearshoring and creating local supply chains?
I think on echoing moving from the just in time, and we want to have other options. We've seen some collaboration, but that's certainly an area where it can be expanded. I mean, just being honest with your competitors, I think when we first saw the pandemic happening, we felt that we were all in it together. And some of that has sort of broken off. But really, if we're going to be successful, we can't have an individual mindset. We have to have sort of a collective and collaborative in supporting everyone in the retail environment. And that could be having very honest conversations about who our suppliers are, what their capabilities are, and the fact that we're going to need to share some suppliers and look at that aspect of collaboration. Gary?
Having joint capital expenditure. Because some of these supplies don't exist now if they do, they're at such a small scale, but we want them to exist. We want them to grow fast. So we may have to say, if I'm in a power, I group together with Reitmans, and I was just about to say Le Chateau, but I can't now, but the other retailers, our apparel retailers, say, look, collectively, we want this supplier to really help us as a collective. We now need to work out how much capital we collectively want to spend with them to build up their capacity so we can respond to consumer trends much quicker. We can actually get ahead of the trend, but imagine that we have to set a forecast 9 months hence for spring, autumn, whatever, fall, and we're having to place an order and we're hoping that we've got it about right. That's a high risk, and we end up marking down, we end up clearing items. What doesn't do that goes in the landfill.
Yeah,
Go on.
alongside that is the fact that, I know we all know that there's not a lot of government investment in the fashion sector and in the retail sector. We
Yeah.
see that for small designers and small boutiques that are trying to get started. Like it's very difficult for them to scale up. And we see that for larger retailers as well. So really, I think a coming together and a collaborative effort is really what's going to help support all of us together getting that investment that we need and also getting that different strategic.
Well, I think, I know we're out of time, but those were the questions that we were getting. But also, I think what's important here is that collaboration that you guys mentioned and the importance of maybe the retailers who are listening now, who know of those emerging manufacturers who need capital investment or need support. Those retailers might feel comfortable reaching out to us because there's always the competition bureau issues. And so bringing those retailers together to talk about the emerging vendors may be wiser to do through a trade association or a group with a competition lawyer. So I would offer that as a closing remark to those who are listening, who are struggling with their vendors or finding vendors who can supply them. And as Gary said, maybe too late now, obviously, for the holiday season, but certainly not for 2022, because I think you've heard from both Audrey and Gary, this problem is not going away. This is going to be a new reality for a very long time. Gary, Audrey, I'm sorry we can't keep you any longer because I'm sure we'd love to chat about supply chain, which is on the top list of concerns for many retailers. But we will reach out to you again and make sure that if members have questions, that we can provide your contact information. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for having us here.
Thank you, Gary. Audrey, thank you so much. So everyone, it's just kind of a teaser, but we thought because Audrey and Gary provided so much insight at the store conference on the issues of supply chain, if you have any ideas or suggestions and you think that's something that RCC should be looking at more closely over and above reporting on the status of the supply chain, please feel free to reach out to me or anybody on the team.
Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your team. You can connect with me via the website retail.ca and go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn by typing linkedin.com/in/last-mile. Look forward to hearing from you and playing an active part with your supply chain and your business's transformation as you start to act boldly, think big, scale, adapt, and win.